Look at this man. Fur. A wooden tube, smoke coming off the end. A body on the ground behind him. The picture is wrong. The accident in it is real. Nobody set out to invent the gun. The people who made it possible were not at war, not hunting, and not thinking about weapons at all. They were trying to live forever. How does that go wrong? Start with the costume, because the costume is a lie and the lie is worth explaining. No one dressed like that ever fired a shot. There are tens of thousands of years between the fur and the barrel. Strip the skins off him and the rest of the image is honest. A person is holding a tube. Something has come out of it, and he has no idea what he is holding. The first gunpowder came out of a room full of medicine jars in China in the 9th century. It was made by men chasing a drug that would stop them dying. They mixed minerals, heated them, wrote the results down, tasted a worrying amount of it, and mixed again. One batch did not turn into a drug. They did not call it a weapon, they called it fire medicine. That was not a joke or a nickname. That was the department it belonged to, and the oldest surviving gun on Earth would fit inside a shoebox. Understand what those workshops were actually for, because it explains everything that follows. An emperor wants to not die. That is the whole industry. He funds men to go and find the substance that stops it. These are not cranks. They are the closest thing that century has to chemists. Furnaces, scales, grinding, records, repetition. The problem is the shopping list. The most promising ingredients are the ones that behave strangely, and the things that behave strangely are mostly poison. Cinnabar, mercury, arsenic, bright, heavy, permanent looking, and completely lethal. Several emperors died drinking their own immortality. Not weakened, not injured, killed by the treatment roughly on schedule. So picture the room properly. Red powder in open dishes, a fire under a sealed pot, a man leaning over it with no eyebrows left. Somewhere in that grind, a batch of unremarkable powders got heated together. It produced a flash, a bang, and a burning roof. We know it happened because somebody wrote a warning about it. A manual from that century tells alchemists very plainly not to combine these particular things. It says the mixture flares up. It says it burns hands and faces. It says it can burn the whole building down. The oldest gunpowder document in human history is a safety notice. Somebody had already been burned. You do not write that warning otherwise, and I would like the name of whoever it was. It was obviously ignored because we are still talking about it. So they had it. And for roughly the next 2 centuries, they mostly used it for parties. This is the part everybody skips. Gunpowder did not walk out of that workshop and become a weapon. It became entertainment. Noise, sparks, smoke, color, packed bamboo tubes lit at festivals, temple days, weddings, funerals. There were even fireworks that ran along the floor. A little tube lit at one end, skittering across the flagstones, and chasing people's feet while it spat sparks. They called it a ground rat. At one court banquet, a ground rat went the wrong way. It shot under the throne. The Empress Dowager stood up and walked out. That is the threat level we are dealing with. The most destructive chemistry ever discovered, and its first recorded victim is a dinner party. Which raises the obvious question. If you have this stuff, why does it take 200 years to point it at somebody? Because it did not do what you assume it does. Early gunpowder was not a propellant. It did not launch anything. It burned. Fast and hot and unreasonably loud, and it threw a jet of flame out of whatever it had been packed into. So the first weapon anybody built with it did not shoot anything at all. What they built was a flamethrower on a stick. Take a length of bamboo, strap it to the front of a spear, pack it, light it, and level it at whoever is closest. It burns for a few seconds. During those seconds, it throws fire into a man's face from arm's length. Then it stops, and you are holding a spear again, and the spear is on fire. It was called a fire lance. There is a painting on silk from a cave complex in western China. One of these tubes appears in the hands of a demon. The tube is raised. The flame is drawn coming out of the open end. Somebody had watched this thing work in real life. Then they put it into a religious painting because it was the most frightening object they could think of. The first time we can properly watch one used is a siege in the year 1132. A city under attack, ladders against the wall, men climbing. The defenders lean over the top with these tubes and burn them off it. Most of the damage was to nerve, not to bodies. Think about what you are actually facing on that ladder. You have trained with a blade since childhood. Every fight of your life has obeyed rules about reach, timing, and distance. Then a man leans over the parapet. The air in front of your face catches fire. There is no counter for that. There is no stance. Here is where the gun genuinely gets invented, and nobody bothered to write down who did it. Somebody at some point put something else in the tube. Not more powder. Rubbish. Lead pellets, broken pottery, scrap iron, shards of porcelain, whatever was small and sharp and sitting nearby. Load it on top of the charge, light the charge, and the flame goes out of the end, carrying all of it with it. That is the entire invention. Right there. The weapon stops being about the fire and starts being about what the fire pushes. I always assumed there was a person standing behind this. A name, a workshop, a moment worth a statue. There is not. The gun begins with a man wondering what happens if he fills a burning tube with garbage first. It also created an immediate problem. Bamboo is a plant. Add more powder, and it splits. Put a solid lump in front of that powder, and the tube now has to contain the pressure of everything inside it trying to leave at once. Bamboo does not contain it. It bursts. It bursts in the hands of the man holding it, which is a bad afternoon for everyone standing in that direction. So the barrel had to stop being a plant. It became bronze, and you can go and look at the result. There is a small metal tube in a Chinese museum, dug out of the far north of the country. It is about as long as your forearm. It weighs roughly 8 pounds. It has a fat, bulging chamber at the sealed end. A socket at the back held a wooden handle. A tiny hole is drilled through the top. That is where you touch the flame in. That is a gun, not an ancestor of one. A handheld metal barrel that launches a projectile using expanding gas. That is the same sentence that describes a rifle this morning. It is around 740 years old, and it would fit in a shoebox with room left over. Firing it takes 2 hands, and neither one of them is really aiming. One holds the shaft steady, the other brings a glowing iron or a smoldering cord down onto that little hole. Then you find out together what happens next. Somebody carried that object. Somebody was terrified of it. Somebody was almost certainly killed by it. And we have no name for any of them, which bothers me. The same accident had also thrown off a second branch, and that one had nothing to do with barrels. Tie a packed tube to an arrow, light it, and let the thrust carry the whole thing forward on its own. That is a rocket, and it left China on a completely different road. Now the part that makes no sense until you look at the numbers. For its first 2 centuries, the gun was worse than the bow. Not marginally, comprehensively. A trained archer puts 10 arrows in the air in a minute. He hits what he is looking at. He does it in the rain, and he does it while moving. The early gun fires perhaps once a minute if nothing goes wrong. It misses a man at 50 paces. Damp weather shuts it down entirely. It is heavy, filthy, slow, and every so often it detonates. So why did it win? Because the archer takes 10 years to build, and the gunner takes 10 days. Bow arms are grown, not issued. You cannot mass produce a childhood. You can mass produce a tube, which is exactly why the Mongols mattered so much. They fought the Chinese cities. They took the sieges. They saw what was coming over the walls at them. Then they did the thing that made them what they were. They kept it. Craftsmen, engineers, and the knowledge itself were absorbed into the empire and carried west. An army turns out to be the fastest known method of moving an idea. Faster than trade routes. Far faster than books. Within a couple of generations, the weapons are everywhere west of China. They reach Europe last, and they arrive on a continent built around 2 things they are about to erase. The first is the knight. A man in plate armor is the most expensive object on a medieval battlefield. The steel takes a specialist months. The horse costs more than a house. The training starts when he is about 7. Arrows skid off him. Blades ring off him. He has been effectively unkillable by ordinary people for 3 centuries. That is not just a military fact. It is why he owns the land and you work it. Then a farmer's son is handed a tube, a lead ball, and a fortnight of instruction. The armor is irrelevant. The bloodline is irrelevant. The decade of training is irrelevant. An entire social pyramid gets taken apart by a boy who has never won a fight in his life and does not need to. I have looked for a more complicated explanation of that collapse, and there is not one. 3 centuries of aristocracy ended by a fortnight of instruction. The second thing is the wall. Castle walls go up tall and thin because the threat had always been a ladder and an arrow, and height defeats both. Then cannon arrive, and height becomes the worst possible shape to be. A tall, thin wall is simply a target that cannot move. So Europe physically changes shape. The walls come down and spread out, low, thick, sloped, angled into sharp points so shot glances away instead of biting in. Castles stop looking like castles. Cities get rebuilt as flat, spiky stars pressed into the ground, and you can still spot them from an airplane window. After that, it moves fast and it moves everywhere. Foreign traders drop 2 guns onto an island to the east. The year is 1543. Within about a decade, the local smiths are producing better ones than the men who brought them. China started all of this by accident while trying to cure death. It ends up importing an improved version of its own invention, back from the people it leaked to. The rocket branch never died either. It stayed separate, tubes and thrust and arrows quietly persisting, and centuries later it is the reason there are footprints on the moon. 1 workshop, 1 ruined afternoon, 2 completely different roads out of it. But here's the thing nobody tells you about the medicine. It never stopped being called medicine. The word those alchemists used was huoyao, fire medicine, and it is still the ordinary everyday word for gunpowder today. Every firearm on this planet is loaded with something called medicine, and the very first thing anyone ever did with it, we still do. This summer, somewhere near you, a crowd will stand in the dark and look up. Someone will set off tubes of that exact substance, for no reason except that it is beautiful. That is the original product. Fireworks are not a byproduct of the gun. The gun is a byproduct of the fireworks. The immortality never worked. Something from that room outlived every single person in it anyway. Thanks for watching. All the sources and studies used in this video can be found in the description below.